Hello, good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Gediz Kaya. I'm the managing partner at Mundo Verde Climate. We are a carbon asset development and climate finance advisory company, also investing in nature-based solutions all around the world, mainly in Africa. So today, actually, we wanted to organize this panel to discuss about the value of nature and actually how we can invest more so that we reach the goals of Paris Agreement. Because even if we stop reducing the emissions right now, reaching the goals of Paris Agreement requires removing these GHG emissions, historical emissions, from the atmosphere by 2050. And that can be done in many ways. Of course, we rely on technology. We know that there's a lot of work on direct air capturing for engineered solutions. However, they are still far from bankability, and there are also technical issues regarding the leakage and how reliable these systems are in terms of storing and capturing carbon. So it seems like our best bet right now is nature. And it's not only the climate, because nature-based solutions projects, these have other aspects, sustainable development goals in terms of generating employment, and because according to research, for instance, if we invest in nature-based solutions right now to reach the goals of Paris Agreement, we can create 86 million jobs just by doing that. So only if nature-based solutions projects receive the support, if the tree planting became business as usual, it would actually generate an average incremental economic growth to developing economies by 3% on average. So these are very, very important numbers. So it's not only climate, but we rely on nature, putting a value on nature, because we want sustainable development as well. And of course, recently, and unfortunately, these solutions have been the center of some negative publicity, as you may have followed, because these assets that we are trying to create to provide finance, mobilize finance to these projects, have been actually perceived as not reliable. Because all in all, what we are doing here is an asset underwriting, right? We are creating a financial asset. We are actually trading it. We are actually selling it to a party. And we need to underwrite it to make sure that the value is intact. But I just want to help everyone to remember the financial crisis of 2008. And we know the mortgage assets have been a toxic asset for so many years, and it failed the entire world in 2008. But we still invest in mortgage, right? There are still investments, because we know housing and construction is the vital part of economy. We cannot give up on that. But why do we give up on nature? Because there have been some misunderwritings of assets in some projects. We need to refine the process. We need to make sure that there is reliable process of underwriting. These are robust, reliable financial assets that can be used everywhere. They should become as usual, but we cannot really abandon them because they are deemed to be toxic. There have been toxic financial assets. We managed to provide better underwriting. The world managed to learn from the experience, and we can do the same with nature-based solutions. So this is all I would like to say this morning, but I, of course, would like to start with a brief keynote speaker. This is actually one of our partners in Tanzania, and I would like to introduce you with Dr. Ernst Iringu, who is actually the director of Living Way, a nature-based, really large-scale nature-based solutions project in Tanzania. Dr. Iringu, please, we would like to welcome you to the floor. If you can elaborate on what you have been doing in Tanzania, your experience, then I will come back and introduce you our panel, and then we will start discussing about the nature-based solutions. Please.
Thank you so much. My name is Ernest Irungu. I'm the director of Living Where You Are Limited, based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, East Africa. And we are the implementers of the program called Tabora Carbon Credit Harvest and Purchase Program. And the program is being implemented jointly with Living Where You Are Limited and Tanzanian government through Tanzania Forest Service Agency. The government has allocated to us about 3 million hectares of forest reserves in Tabora region to implement this project, which can have enormous benefit to the country as the whole, and it can lift out of poverty. These projects can lift out of poverty nearly 2.5 million people. And therefore, I would like to speak a few words to emphasize the need in investing in carbon credit projects in Africa, specifically in Tanzania, the need for that. First of all, this investment, this direct investment, direct foreign investment in our country specifically, will result, first of all, in conservation of the forest. That's one of the most important aspects. Knowing that, using a layman language, the forests, they're like the lungs of the world. So this direct foreign investment in carbon credit projects will increase the national GDP and the per capita. In that sense, to reduce poverty tremendously. The project will reduce poverty in the country. And in most African countries, as we know, poverty is like a plague. So investing in projects like this will address this plague, maybe to use the strongest language as possible. And also, investing in this sort of projects will be able to develop value additional chain and sustainability in beekeeping. Beekeeping, as you know, we have got our project. We are planning to place 500,000 beehives in the next 5 years, and each beehives. Okay, thank you. Yes, and also in livestock keeping, sustainable timber investment, low energy emissions and energy development, agriculture and other ecosystems goods, which can enhance the country economy tremendously. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Engel. Actually, one key message, maybe, which is very important to us because they have been in this process for some time. that Dr. Iringu didn't mention is that how long they have been working on this project to design and start the implementation, and how long they have been searching for financing to implement this project. So it's really important for us to understand that designing and implementing these projects really takes time, and we don't have that much time to reach the goals of Paris Agreement. So that's why we need to act now. So this morning, I actually would like to welcome our panel right now. We have Thomas Gambra from Ghana. He is the Ghana Cocoa Forest Red Plus program lead, and he's also with the Forestry Commission. Thank you. We have Angelo Sartori, director at Verra, and he is also responsible with regional engagement. We have Leslie Doschinger. He is the founder and CEO of Terra Global, which is a long-term MBS investor in Africa. Can we say that? Investor, yes. And we also have JP Thea. He's the lead economist at Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and he's actually he's been working on investing in nature, and he'll this morning elaborate the economic side of the projects. So I think, I think I'll just have to stay here because the mic is only here. So I want to start with actually Thomas, because you are coming from the project side. Can you give us a stock-taking picture of the Red Plus programs in Ghana, and actually how it contributed in the nature preservation, but also what needs to be done, and what is the untapped potential beyond Red Plus, and what can we do?
Thank you very much for having me here. Leslie, it's nice to meet you on this panel as well. When it comes to Red Plus, Red Plus is basically the global mechanism. In Ghana, we see it just beyond the forest sector. You could see that deforestation, forest degradation is related to the forest sector, but the actions and inactions go beyond the forest sector. Why do I say that? Someone will be causing deforestation because the person may want to establish his or her farm land, and that's basically agriculture. Someone may be doing logging because of maybe livelihood issues. So that's the perspective within which we come as a country in Ghana. And we did analysis of our drivers of deforestation, forest degradation, and we realized that agriculture is the lead cause of deforestation, forest degradation. But within the agriculture sector, or subsector, the lead has been the cocoa farming establishment. And Ghana is a lead, or the second lead exporter of cocoa, and this is an issue that brings policy, key policy administrators around the table. So we've came up with a program within our Red Plus strategy. That's one of our programs called the Ghana Cocoa Forest Red Plus program. One, to halt expansionist cocoa farming practices in new forest frontiers so that we protect our forest. And the logic in there, I remember going to meet a farmer one day and ask if there's any program at all that you would want to be implemented, the interventions, what would be your key motivating factor? The farmer's answer is, and it's very pronounced, that something that will lead to increase in yield, because they relate increase in yield to increase in income at the end of the day. So we needed to come up with a program that will primarily lead to increase in yield, 1, 2, help protect the forest, 3, bring stakeholders together, because at the end of the day, it's the private sector that are interested in the cocoa beans. How do we align the objectives of the private sector vis-a-vis that of the communities and government together in this process? Hence the program called the Ghana Cocoa Forest Red Plus program. And lo and behold, this is also a Red Plus program, so we needed to bring up the emission reduction component of it. And through the Forest Carbon Partnership process, Ghana signed an emission reduction payment agreement with the World Bank. And in our engagement, we were very sure of one thing: the increase in yield was the focus of farmers. So what we focused on was the increase in yield, and we were always telling farmers or community members that there could be the emission reduction payment as a financing mechanism at the end of the day, but that is only an icing on the cake. Good agricultural practices was the focus initially, and that was able to help us sell the message. And the private sector, we were able to meet the private sector for a very long time. It took a very long time. We started these engagements in 2008, and we were able to sign an emission reduction payment in 2019, over 11-year period. That's the level of engagement that we had to build capacity, to engage the communities, to engage the private sector. And some years down the line, we've received the carbon payment. We've distributed the carbon payment. And throughout this process, what we've basically learned is that transparency is key. One, inclusivity is key. And we've learned over the period, we're able to realign the objectives of the private sector, because this is a resource base. You need to produce resource before you get any payment. And we're able to meet private sector and realign the objectives so that they invest in the program. We costed the program, and it was about $230 million. How are we going to get this funding? Unless we realign the objectives of the private sector into the program. And that has been the selling case in this particular program. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was a clear perspective from the field side. So I actually want to ask something Leslie right now, because she has been on the ground for so many years. She has this also great field experience. So how do you see the opportunities for nature-based solutions projects in Africa? And in deploying capital to these projects, what are the main obstacles you face? Because you're on the implementation side as much as you're on the side for raising finance for these projects.
Yeah, you're right. And we, until the market finally took off a couple years ago, we mostly did technical work, working with local partners, NGOs, governments, civil society. So we feel really fortunate to have that experience and that perspective, as well as the work we've done on greenhouse gas and impact quantification. But as of the beginning of this year, we raised a pool of capital, as you said, to deploy to provide risk capital to nature-based solutions globally. But we see Africa as a region that has a ton of potential. One, just looking at the NDCs from so many of the African countries, you know, usually more than 60% of the NDCs is for forest and agriculture, and of that, oftentimes more than 70% is conditional on finance. So there's a real need to, as you know, to channel climate finance there. There's also, you know, we view private sector climate finance, when done well, to be one of the most important rural development tools. Like you said, well, your finance came from Carbon Fund. I know you're also pursuing, because we're working in an advisory capacity, new sources of finance. And when done well, you can really make a huge difference. We heard from Tanzania about how that program is improving rural livelihoods. Plus, we have the whole issue in Africa of mangroves. And there's so much opportunity for mangroves as unique ecosystems with biodiversity. So, you know, I think some of the things that make it hard to deploy capital, which was the second part of your question, is number one, I mean, maybe not in this order, but number one, we see, you know, it's a new market. There's some bad actors out there. And oftentimes bad actors don't get caught up front, and sometimes they delay, and the damage that is caused really reflects overall on the sector, and it makes it hard for those of us who are both capital raising and trying to deploy private sector reimbursable capital to say, no, that's not how things are done. And we also see some really high profile deals being done that are not structured in a way that can ensure a just transition through nature-based solutions, where you see the deal is, we will give you X, and sometimes X is not well defined, and we're going to take all your carbon credits, we're going to spend a bunch of money, and we're going to give you back a percentage of those. So just sort of some of the bad actors make it hard sometimes. And then the other thing, which I hope will speed up over time, is just I mean, Ghana is an extremely advanced country, can make decisions, knows where the authorities are to make decisions. But a lot of the countries we work with, if you need to sign a commercial agreement to risk capital, sometimes getting that signed can take a long time. So those are the things we see, both the opportunities and some of the challenges.
Thank you so much. So, speaking of like actors and projects maybe failing, I also emphasize this when I opened the panel this morning, the integrity, how we actually create process for a better underwriting of these assets so that actually we know the exact financial value so we can deploy actually finance with a sustainable manner. So this is where we rely on international standards. So we have Angelo with us this morning, and I want to ask your organization, Vera, what have you been doing lately to ensure the integrity of these carbon credits from these nature-based solutions projects?
Thank you very much for the invitation. In terms of integrity, I can say that we are working in two different levels. One of them is related to what we need to do to be aligned with external initiatives. I will explain what means that later. And also internally, we are doing several updates in terms of the natural-based solutions methodologies and in the general requirements of the BCS program in several things related to the AFOLUL or the land use sector. With external initiatives, there are several things that we are doing, for example, right now with governments and also with international frameworks related to the voluntary carbon market and also with the compliance carbon markets. In the framework of the voluntary carbon market, you know that right now is the ICBCM, the Integrity Council of the Voluntary Carbon Market, and they approved time ago the Carbon Core Principle. So 2 weeks ago, we submitted the BCS program to be assessed in the framework of the ICBCM Carbon Core Principle. So we are right now, we need to start some conversation with the people there in the ICBCM, so finally to have everything approved in the framework of the BCS program. That means the BCS program, that means to have the methodologies of the BCS program eligible, to have all the validation and verification processes approved, all whatever everything that is related to the registry system and the general requirements of the BCS program standard. In terms of the compliance carbon market, we are working very close with several governments, developing governments in terms of what happened in the future in the framework of the transactions related to the Article 6.2. In this case, each bilateral agreement will have some specific things that we need to know in the framework to align the BCS program requirements with any specific situation. The majority of the countries at the moment, in terms of the bilateral agreements, are including the natural-based solutions. So they are selecting some specific methodologies of the BCS program, for example, that can be including the framework of the bilateral agreements. They are defining some specific years in terms of the carbon credits where it's possible to do the transaction. So everything is related finally with the integrity. So in the framework of the compliance carbon market of the Article 6, we are also working in deep with governments and also obviously following the international negotiation in the framework of the Article 6.4. At national level, there are several countries right now that they have or they want to have domestic carbon markets. We are working almost for the last 5 years as an eligible program in Colombia and South Africa. Both countries, they have a carbon tax where it's possible to offset with the verified carbon unit that we issue from the BCS program, but right now there are a lot of more countries that already have some own regulations in terms of the domestic carbon market. And each regulation is very different between countries, and we need to apply normally with the BCS program. And the governments, they do an assessment of the requirements that we have in the BCS program, and sometimes we need to adapt some specific things to be eligible in the future in the domestic carbon market, and always is related to improve the high quality of the carbon units in the framework of the social and environmental integrity. So that is in general with the national and governmental regulations, with the regulation in the framework of the Article 6. Almost the same happened with our situation with CORSIA, and in the framework of the carbon core principle of the ICVCM. But also internally, we are doing several things related to improve the integrity in the future. For example, right now, we have a new process to update and review the methodologies every 5 years. We have some very old methodologies, and the technique, the scientific advance, obviously are moving forward very quickly. And we need to update the majority of the methodologies, mainly the natural-based solutions, because right now there are new approaches from the technical point of view, for example, to define baseline, to do the MRV system and everything, even related to how to address the social and environmental safeguards in the framework of the natural-based solution project. So we are having this internal process to update more frequently wherever is needed in the methodologies, and I want to give a very concrete example of that. And that is related with RED Plus that you mentioned in the framework of Ghana work from the government. We announced last week, on Monday last week, the new consolidated RED Plus methodology. That is using a totally different approach to define the baseline in comparison with the old RED methodologies. And everything is related to improve everything related to the integrity. Yesterday we had a side event here also explaining all the details about the new methodology, but finally something very similar could happen with other kind of methodologies related to natural-based solutions. We have very recently an update process related to the improved forest management methodologies. We have a new afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation methodology. So if you analyze the last 2 years, almost everything in the framework of the methodologies that provide the technical and operative guidance to design and implement a project, almost all the natural-based solution methodologies are having some improvement in the recent time in terms to provide more integrity from the social and environmental point of view.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing up the continuous improvement aspect, because we also believe that as long as we recognize the need for continuous improvement, we will succeed in bringing better projects to life, and we will succeed in mobilizing more finance to this business. And JP, actually, I want to ask you a few things about your most recent report, Nature as Infrastructure. I want to bring it up to everyone's attention. It's a must-read. It's great. I learned a lot from that paper. But of course, asking you some questions about that paper in terms of your goal to build nature as an infrastructure, and also creating a new asset class to mobilize finance. You are mentioning certain methods and ways of doing that, because it requires various tools and new tools. And what are they really? Like, what new tools do we need? And what kind of new financial instruments do we need to define nature as the new infrastructure?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the sharing of the insights on the field. In the report that AIB just released a couple of days ago, there are some examples. Let me share some examples first before coming back to the financing. So in China, in the northern part of China, there has been a 30-year, 40-year effort to plant trees to prevent desertification and to prevent the dust from coming to the city. It's a massive effort. Now, what is the problem there? In order to plant trees that are hardy enough to restore, to withstand the harsh conditions, the hardy trees have very little commercial value. So it is very difficult to monetize the kind of trees that you plant as nature as an infrastructure. In Indonesia, there is a lot of evidence also described in the report that mangroves prevent flood losses, tidal floods. It prevents the damages coming in from flood. But again, it's very difficult to monetize it commercially. So there are many numerous examples, and we get asked where nature has the power, nature-based solution, nature as infrastructure has tremendous power, but we get asked the question a lot, how to monetize? So unfortunately, there are no simple solutions to both of the three or many examples that I mentioned. So one of the ways that MDBs, multilateral development banks, can do is to lend at low cost, long tenure, to nature assets. So for example, in AIIB, there's no reason why countries should come to us to build grey infrastructure, to get financing for grey infrastructure, roads, bridges, and ports, and so on. We will do that. But if countries come to AIIB to say that I want to borrow long term to protect a mangrove, to protect a river, to protect an estuary, and all these things, AIIB will try. I think there's no reason why we cannot provide the finance against that. Now, coming back to the commercialization, unfortunately, it means a little bit that the government has to throw in a little bit of fiscal resources into the project. It also means that AIIB may then have to go and crowd in private philanthropic capital to put in some grant money in order for those projects to make work. Let me say one thing that, before I stop here, let me say one thing that I think is very promising is KPI-linked bonds. I think bonds are easier to understand and easier to scale. If you try to do it project by project, it is actually quite difficult. So if a development bank, for example, can go to the market and say that let's join the private sector, raise this $500 million bond, and these $500 million bonds will be deployed to projects all over the world that fulfill a certain nature protection KPI and so on, and use the development banks as the kind of enforcing of standards and so on. I think the KPI-linked bonds is an instrument to scale up a lot more faster than a project-by-project basis. Sorry to come back to the central theme. There are no easy solutions. Monetization is hard, but we need to find different instruments, including carbon credits and so on, to make sure that we can crowd in more capital. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Leslie, actually, we just heard, there are different ways of financing these projects. Of course, carbon credits as a collateral, or providing carbon credits like offtake agreements. These are all different ways of financing these projects. And we also have fixed income instruments, green bonds and climate bonds, which is like the fastest growing financial instrument in the world, I think. And Leslie, what kind of financing methods do you have to finance your projects in Africa? And because of all that time you have spent on these projects, you have developed projects, if you were to replicate one of them, which one would that be and why?
Great. Well, those are two a little bit divided questions, but the first one is pretty straightforward. I mean, the investment structures that we typically use for our projects are very, very simple prepaid forwards. So we'll provide $4 million up front. We'll get paid back in a certain number of carbon credits that is based on a link to a market price that's a discount to reflect the risk that we take. And then generally our structures, our climate finance structures also will purchase credits linked to the market over the remaining life of our pool, which is a 17-year pool. Now, we've done some kind of cool things by turning that simple structure into a loan, which had better treatment, for example, in Colombia for tax treatment for our investee. But basically, it's the same thing, but we created this really cool thing called a PIK loan, or payment in kind loan. So it's pretty straightforward financing. But that's when private sector climate finance can pay for everything, right? Oftentimes with the removals portfolio, so with basically tree planting, tree growing, as you said, it's often difficult to actually fund all of that purely through, you know that too, through private sector climate finance. So using the buzzword of the last however many years, we look for blended sources of finance, whether they're more junior, longer term loans that actually end up being, you know, junior to the repayment of the prepaid forward, whether they're grant funding. So if you can, you know, we work with a number of large providers of grant funding to blend in capital. We try to do that, and that's pretty necessary in most cases when you're doing mostly tree planting, or we'll blend tree planting in with RED projects where you can afford to have the RED project pay for some of those early costs of the tree planting components. So that's kind of a little bit about the structures we use, not super sexy. I mean, I used to trade long-dated derivatives. They're way less sexy than that. But to your other question about what program would we want to replicate, we were this is a good example of blended finance. We were very, very fortunate way back in 2009 to work with a local NGO in Malawi, and we're a partner on a USAID-funded biodiversity grant. It was a $12 million grant to protect to implement activities to protect 3 large protected areas in Malawi, working with the communities in the buffer zone. And that, I think, is the first time that USAID ever paid for carbon development. And so between 2009, we finally, after one no-cost extension, were able to issue credits in 2014, and the grant funding was gone, right? So the program was going to continue to operate based on selling credits. It took us until 2015 to sell the first credits, but since then, over the last 7 years, this program has generated a significant amount of income, revenue actually, all of which goes back down to the ground. And it's really, really important because it's at a scale that are 300,000 people living in the 5 kilometers around the 3 protected areas, and it is engaging with the government. So we have a great relationship with the Department of Parks and Wildlife, but it's also built the capacity of formally recognized community associations there to be able to manage funds, to be able to deploy things, and then it promotes not only better forest protection, but as we all know with RED, it includes things like, you know, woodlots for wood energy, cook stoves, crop diversification for better food security, conservation agriculture, other things like beekeeping, and being able to do that kind of scale. Again, even if we didn't have to start with a $12 million grant, we'd love to do that in other places across landscapes in Africa. So it's our longest running program. Erica, who's here from Terra, she's run it since she started at the company, and we feel really, really, we've learned a lot, both good and bad. We've learned a lot doing that. It's also really, really hard for us to account for because it's a Miambo forest, so just the carbon accounting alone is something that is really challenging, but anyway, it's something that I hope we can do more of.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Thomas, actually, I want to ask you also about beyond RED Plus. You mentioned there is untapped potential, but mostly untapped potential also means we are beyond maybe low-hanging fruits. We need to go more challenging projects, and Ghana is probably in that phase as well. So where do you see the private sector's role there, and how do you want to cooperate it as a public office for those who are interested in designing and implementing those projects and seeking for finance? So where would be the collaboration? Because you have all the experience from RED Plus. I know, I mean, I've been there. I actually know how experienced the public offices are because you have done it, you were there. But now, for the not very low-hanging fruits, it's the private sector is going ahead, trying to deploy finance for new projects and design new projects. Where is the collaboration between the state and the new private sector finance?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very tough one, I must admit. So one key area, you realize that, for instance, Ghana, we've come up with a framework for Article 6, And that's a very good entry point for the private sector going forward. It gives guidance as to how, and it lists projects in there and areas that the private sector can engage government on and invest and get returns on their investment as well. And we're also coming up with a very good nesting approach to accommodate the private sector investment. Our focus primarily has been that we are not primarily interested in small projects. We want it to be at the jurisdictional scale. Having said that, we are coming up with a very good nesting approach to accommodate the private sector investment in the landscapes also as well. And just from the private sector perspective, but from the government perspective, and based on the experience that we've had, private sector investment could come in the form of maybe upfront financing, because we've come up with we've shown that we're able to deliver the emission reductions. Ghana, I think 3 days ago, signed an emission reduction purchase agreement with Emergent, for instance, under the art trees, for instance. And people may have their issues with the art trees, but that's not the subject today. And it signals to the private sector like the intent of government and the fact that if the private sector invests in the activities within the landscape, they are going to get return on their investment, because Ghana has now been able to sell something out to the market as we have it. To also add that the areas that I believe practically that the private sector could also be involved in is areas within the mangrove areas. That's hugely an untapped area that the private sector can engage government and invest in. And I think Leslie mentioned the biodiversity part of it. That's a hugely untapped area that government is willing to also engage the private sector going forward. So just these are the areas I believe that we are very much willing. We have the frameworks developed already that the private sector can easily plug in as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, a great analysis of the scale and the ambition, because we, of course, always have to optimize between our ambitions and the scale that can be financed. And I think the project from Tanzania, from Dr. Iringo, is a good example of that, because they have this huge project. How many hectares did you say, Dr. Iringo, that the Tabora project that you've been working on?
3 million hectares.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, we are implementing the project in an area 3.5 millions.
Huge project.
Yes, a huge project. Yes.
And how long have you been working on to design that project?
We started designing the project in 2013, end of 2013. And by end of 2014, we had completed the designing of the project document. And then there was delays in processing the signing of the memorandum of understanding with the government, which delayed for almost 3 years. Eventually, in 2019, we were able to sign that agreement.
Yeah.
And from there, now we have been implementing that project at certain levels. But the challenges that we've been facing, especially in the area of financing, we have been going through various obstacles to obtain the funds to execute this project. That's our main big challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it is actually a good example of great ambition that took years to design, and now it came to life, seeking for financing. But of course, this is also a good indicator, like the times are changing. So we are now opting for more ambitious projects because we need more removals. We need to invest more in nature. And we see that there are small projects, big projects, and actually there is more projects coming to life. and this new assets that are actually used to mobilize finance towards these projects. And of course, in part of the integrity is also digitalization, like how we can actually create a good digital system so that we can secure these assets and make sure that they are reliable because they can be actually monitored, stored, and verified. And I know that Vera is doing also a lot for digitalization and to create a digital infrastructure. Would you like to elaborate on that, Angelo? That like the digital, the efforts for a better digital system and to manage and verify these assets?
Yes, actually, one of the main things that we are doing right now to reduce the waiting time instead of our interaction with project developers, because we are receiving a lot of more projects in comparison with the 2 years ago. So we know that there are some concern about our waiting times, but one of the things that we are working right now is in terms of the digitalization of several things. First one, probably something very basic, but right now, if you need to submit to Vera and start the formal review, a project description or a monitoring report, the format is a very old-fashioned PDF. So we are thinking to have a new system, probably operative next year, at least a pilot phase, that is possible to submit the key information in a platform. So you reduce time, you reduce the possibility to make human mistakes, typo mistakes. So that is one of the most basic thing that we are doing in the digitalization era of Vera. Also, right now, we have some tools that are already in a digital format. For example, we announced almost 1 month ago the non-permanence tool that is to calculate and assess the risk of each project to define how many credits had to be maintained in a buffer system. Right now, we have the digital version of the tool for all the land use project, so all project developer can calculate everything in a faster and easy way. And we are thinking to do the same in the future with several different tools. Right now, in terms of nesting, for example, to align the jurisdictional carbon accounting things with the project scale. Also, we are developing some methodologies and tools. And in the next step, we want to have everything about nesting also is on digital platform, to facilitate the use of the project developers, to use of the validation and verification bodies during the review phases using this technology, and again, to reduce the human possibility to make mistakes. Also, another relative primitive thing right now is that all project developers need to send an email to somebody in Vera to know where internally is the review process of each project. So right now we are piloting a project tracker, a project hub, where it's possible to follow in real time where your project is internally in the review. So it's much faster. You maintain a better knowledge about what is happening internally with the waiting times in terms of the review process. That is in general. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's good that Vera also recognizes the need for optimizing the weight and minimizing the actually errors. And in that sense, we call it race to net zero, right? I mean, there is a race to bring more removals to reach the Paris Agreement goals. But it's also a race because if there are investors, that means that you need to create sellable assets as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. Of course, without, considering the errors. But here, actually, standards like Vera play an important role because if you mobilize finance, and I think Leslie and I know that really well, that we have investors and they want to see results as quickly as possible. That's why we need to see that international standards are actually taking action to make sure that the process is smooth and clear so that we can actually realize those assets as quickly as possible. But Of course, multilateral development banks, they always played a very crucial role in bringing finance to carbon reduction and removal projects past 20 years. JP, where do you see the role of MDBs here, and what is the business plan of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
So thank you for the question again. So on the digitalization, so let me just add on a little bit on that. So maybe I'm old. Sorry. Maybe this is not new news to the team here, but one thing we found that's easy to do, relatively easy to do, and our economists are doing this. Thank you so much. Is to use satellite data. So the satellite data technologies now is pretty advanced. So the European satellite agencies, for example, provides data to the extent that you can even track the depth of the forest. So when we build a road, you will see in the report, we actually put in pixel and hexagon. We could track the loss of the forest, to whether we are losing primary forest, we are losing secondary forest, and all this, it can be tracked. So to the extent that technology can be deployed, I think makes the verification process a little bit easier. Carbon is a bit harder to track, but wildlife losses, forest losses, they are very visible. So to a certain extent, there is some advantages there. On the business plan going forward, so next year, AIIB, the president of AIIB has committed to a nature action plan. So AIIB will, after all the research is done, I think next year this is the year whereby we will start doing the real policy things, right? And then try to get in place instruments. I see a few directions, potential directions that we can take. Number one, to do direct lending into nature projects. We have very few such projects. We have a lot of gray infrastructure projects. We will still have to do some and then mitigate the impact, right? It's very tough to get rid of the road. It's very tough to get rid of the power plant. It's very tough. You must have some. But we would like to see shareholders, countries, bring to us more nature, mangrove restoration, river restoration, estuary restoration. We can lend very long term and slightly cheaper than the market, and hopefully that provides a source of finance. AIB is going to do that. So I think we will also put in place we'll try to put in place more innovative techniques, for example, again, to invest in these nature-linked bonds. There is another class of asset that is a little bit more niche, and we are having certain conversations with certain group, but that one is a bit more difficult, which is the debt for nature swap. This is particularly an instrument that's useful for low-income countries with high debt sustainability issues. You know about it, but getting into the arrangement, getting the creditors to agree to the swap, getting the grants to come in to pay for the reduction in the yields and so on is difficult. So AIB may go into that. So we have not completely firmed out our plans, but we commit to having a nature action plan next year. We'll bring it to the shareholders. We'll roll out more instruments to finance nature-based projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the panel for their valuable contribution. I hope it was also useful for the audience. We managed to discuss the many aspects of the mobilizing finance towards nature-based solutions projects in Africa. I would like to now ask the audience if there are any questions. Please.
Marilia Martins, I'm a managing director for Climate Nature at Cross-Boundary Emerging Markets.
Actually, do you want to use this because so everyone hears your question?
Sure. Right.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Happy to.
There's a mic here. It's right there. There you go.
Cordless one? Oh, there's a cordless one.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for your insights. I'm Marilia Martins. I'm a managing director for Climate and Nature at Cross-Boundary, which is an emerging markets and emerging and frontier markets investment advisory firm. I really like the analogy of nature as an infrastructure asset. We use that analogy in our own firm as well. And I think it tends to resonate with investors as well, this need for long-term patient capital. I guess my question would be that I think that need to build the capital stack for nature further is really important. But I think what we see with a lot of project developers private sector, project developers in the African continent is that there's more need for a more risk taker sort of equity investor than there is for bonds, right? Like we don't see the market being necessarily there for like being able to like take bonds, right? There's no collateral to lend that against. So I guess my question would be like how willing would the IIB or like other DFIs, how do you see them willing to take that long-term risk when there's not a lot for that risk or for that loan to be lent against, right? There's unless there's off-takers, but like there's no off-takers that are necessarily, there's not a lot of supply there yet. So just, I guess like getting a bit of more post-check on what you're seeing and maybe for Leslie as well, your perspective working with developers as well, and where you see the most appetite for capital being on that side.
So thanks for raising this question. It's a very good one. I think mobilization of private capital into these nature-based projects is going to be tough. So I acknowledge that right up front. It's not going to be easy. So typically financing, we have a 721 or 811 type of formulation. Now, what is a 721 or 811? You try to find grant makers and philanthropic capital to do the first loss, the one. And then you try to find MDBs or the people who can take a longer term loss or take a longer term through the cycle, find the other one or two. So one or two, and then you layer on the remaining 70 as private sector bond investors. And with that, you create a financial structure, maybe say $500 million or $1 billion. You create that structure, 721 or 822, 811. And then you go find a slew of projects to invest. You cannot invest in one single project because the failure risk is too high. So by the time you pull in many projects, you try to diversify the failure risk, and you try to protect the 70 and make sure that they get a reasonable yield. This has been I would say the kind of I can even say this is the kind of textbook way to really try to scale up innovative finance, not just to nature, to a lot of other new products, venture capitalists or so on. This is the kind of structure we are trying to use to scale. Find the venture capitalists, then find maybe the long-term capital, so on. So there's not going to be an easy solution. Just to maybe come back to this. We need that because if you do project by project, carbon credits and so on, you can achieve an impact, but it takes a long time, and it takes too many. So this kind of scaling, I think, is the one that is needed. Thank you.
I guess I can add a little bit to that, the perspective, a couple things. First, I agree with you completely, a fancy capital stack, unless it's actually for risk mitigation, which is super valuable, but it's not what's needed. I mean, we actually need investors like you guys that'll take risk. We also think that in the nature sector, direct investments are really hard to manage. First off, they don't come to you cooked. We spend sometimes as much as a year and a half to get something investment ready, and then it's still only a $4 million average investment. Maybe you have some that are 1, some that are 15 or 20, but it's not a lot of money. So it takes the specialized expertise, it takes the ability to either through somehow getting grant funding or off our balance sheet to make things bankable, to help make things bankable. So I think the opportunity, whether it's through a DFI or other forms of risk mitigation, we're looking for it all the time. But in the meantime, while we're waiting to get some risk, whether it's first loss, whether it's a guarantee, we've got to put money to work. So, and it looks like equity, because you're right, the only collateral is the carbon credit. It doesn't really get structured as equity, but I think, you know enough about the sector to have seen that. I hear what you're saying. I mean, direct investments for those people who aren't experts in the sector are hard. Yeah. So, and we work, one of the things about our model that I think is different than, we're fortunate because we have a technical team that's separate from our investment team. And that technical team works side by side on whether it's design, support for implementation, participatory monitoring, And that's a technical service. But the thing is that asset is the thing that's going to make our investors have a return. So we're really fortunate to be able to provide that end-to-end with two unique groups. So we have Erica, who runs our technical teams over here. You know, we have our investment team. I'm like the only one with a hat across the two. And I think that that's the only way we're going to scale and have, because if we have bad results, then nobody's going to keep putting money in the sector. So, but we would like to get some risk mitigation from you guys if you have some appetite for that. Oops. You want to hold that?
So it's a very active debate in the MDB community, how much risk to take, CAF review and so on. I'm speaking off the cuff a little. This is not AIB policy. I want to just say that this is not AIB policy, but more of going through the thinking and telegraphing the thinking, right? I think if you ask DFI, like AIB, to go to the top layer, you have no development impact because you are playing it too safe. I think if you go ask AIIB to completely always take first loss, it's also difficult because it means that we cannot protect our AAA ratings and it may affect our borrowing costs, which ultimately affects the shareholders. So I feel that we can find something in the mezzanine for the DFIs to play. I think we can then help scale up the top, and we need some from the equity investors at the bottom. I think that is the sweet spot for us to play the 20. You see where I'm coming from? And then you're right. Once we get that scale up, individual people who are investing in a bond, they don't have to deal with the project. It's very difficult for them. So they deal with a pool. They deal with a diversified pool, and that's the way to get them on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, I think you had a question.
Hi, Chris Goldblatt with the Fish Reef Project. We've been working for a number of years in Africa to develop what's called the Great African Food Reef, where we're building up biogenic artificial reefs in East and West Africa, mainly as a blue carbon bank. Naturally, we've gone through the funding cycles. It has been frustrating along the way. And we've worked a little bit with AIB in the past, so I guess I have a direct question for you. If a sovereign came to you guys and said, look, we want to borrow $200 million to make very large biogenic reefs for food security and all the other benefits that come with it as a blue carbon bank, and then the revenues from the carbon credits would service the loan, and then they would also enjoy some profit back to the sovereign. Is that an offer that you would seriously entertain?
That's right, but not in the way that you describe. But let me describe the investment process, right? So when the sovereign comes to us to borrow, the sovereign, we have preferred creditor status, preferential treatment from the sovereign. So we take the sovereign risk. Of course, if the sovereign can prove to us that they are backed up, this particular project is backed up by carbon credits, it's all the better because it both make economic sense and financial sense. So those things are a little bit, two things are the same. Two things of the two separate things. So to summarize, if the sovereign came to say that we need to borrow 200 million to restore a river, AIB doesn't actually need the sovereign to produce a revenue stream because the sovereign has fiscal capacity, it can tax and so on. But if the sovereign can demonstrate a general revenue stream, even through credits, all the better because it strengthens the case both economically and financially. But these are slightly I hope you see my point. There are slightly different considerations in the investment process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Joseph.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm Joseph. I have just one or two questions. This goes to Angelo. I would repeat what Kaya said, continued improvement. I know, Vera, you have recently brought out the waste collection credits and waste recycling credits. So what about the mode of financing? Will it be different from the previous one that we know? And how promising is it to assure the people that are coming to venture into waste collecting, especially clearing our beaches, because it has got a potential to employ a lot of people in the coast of Africa as well. So how is the mode of financing is there in the WCC and the WRC as that of nature-based solutions? Thank you.
But are you asking about the new methodology or in general?
Yes, just the new methodologies in the waste collection credits and the waste recycling credits. It's a new opportunity, just of nature-based solutions, to employ people there so they can start trading the credits, just like the one we generate in NBS. As we have seen, the challenge is financing. What do we get as a promise from the carbon standard point of view? Will it be also struggling to get finance in this kind of credits like it is for others, or it will be, you have sorted, it has got a smooth learning curve from the previous credits? Yep.
Okay, I don't know if I understand very well all the question, but in general terms, in all the BCS program, we have specific requirements, and right now we have updated the requirements about the benefit sharing plan. Before the update, this point was very general, but right now we included several things that all projects need to be very specific about how the benefit sharing plan, and that means in some cases the level of employment directly of the community involved in the project looks like. So, for example, right now we are very specific even in terms of everything related to the human rights in the projects that are very important in terms of the land use activities. So we are not so explicit in terms of how the benefit sharing plan and the involvement of the communities in terms of the employees have to be. That depends of each project, but we review that everything have to be in agreement with the communities. And during the validation and verification process, the auditor, the third-party independent organization, need to go to the field and analyze, obviously with evidence, that all the people is agree in terms of the benefit sharing plan and how they share finally the incomes of the sale of the VCUs with the communities. And that is very important, mainly in all the AFOLU project, all the projects related to agriculture activities, forestry activities, and right now, more recently, about other land use that are related, for example, with blue carbon. But that is, in general terms, the requirements that we have for this sector in terms of the involvement of the communities in different terms of social things, for example, related to the employments.
Thank you. I think we can take one more question, the gentleman on the first row.
Thank you. Hi, Olivier Lejeune. I'm a journalist with Quantum Commodity Intelligence. I have a question for Leslie. Just curious, what sorts of prices do you see in the primary forward market for REDD+ and reforestation? And have you seen a downturn in the last year, I guess?
That's kind of a loaded question, isn't it? Thank you, though. Thanks for being here and for covering this event. We have been, I would say, not super active. We've got a few projects that are issuing, so my comments will be based on a fairly limited sample because we only market credits that we actually develop. We're not a broker in any way. We've been really fortunate, particularly for the Malawi project, which I mentioned, that it's one of the fairly few triple gold, so VCS plus CCB triple gold. It's in an LDC country. And we've been very, very fortunate, even though we are currently selling our second monitoring period, which ended in September 2019. So, you know, if you were watching the market and looking at the pricing over the last year, you know, a while back, people wouldn't look at 2019 vintages at all. Right, and we didn't do frequent verifications because before we had a good amount of extra money, we didn't want to spend the money, but as we started selling credits more, we were able to do those. So I guess getting back to it, we've seen in the last 6 months or so, even in the last maybe 4 months, that people who weren't interested in buying slightly older credits, which we think is stupid, but it is part of the market, we're starting to pay up. So we've sold credits over the last year. Again, these are all actually reduction credits, VCS, CCB, VM6, which has nesting in it. It's one of the only avoided unplanned REDD methodologies out there that's been out there for a long time that use nesting. And we've sold credits anywhere from $8 to, I think, 11 or so. And even those older vintages we've recently sold at sort of the lower end of that. And we have about, not a lot, but we have some credits from our first our first monitoring period, which ended in 2013, and we're starting to see some interest with those. We don't have a lot left, and ask Erica, those were the hardest credits to actually generate when you think about what it had to happen on the ground in those early years to actually reduce deforestation and degradation. We've seen the market's gone down some, but we've been really fortunate and feel really good. Those are all spot transactions. And the way we do our forward transactions, risk is all based on the market for a similar credit type. So if, for example, we were putting money to work in a project that was either a double gold or a triple gold red, it would be pegged off of not only the trades we've done, but CBL. We also use the new Trove MSCI data. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. I'm not sure that answers it robustly, but hopefully that answers it some.
Just to point you to this work that has been done by EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund, that tries to, based on so many REDD+ projects in South America, Africa, and try to do a prediction of that, and they give a similar figure, $8 to $12 for forward sales. So you can check on that as well to give you further details.
And on the removal side of things, I mean, we haven't traded removal credits recently, but if you've looked at the market data, you know, they're usually somewhere between twice and 2 and 3 times, but there aren't that many removal projects out there, right? You know, you have the big, huge Pakistan blue carbon, you know, reforestation one, and that's traded at some pretty high premiums. I mean, they should trade higher. They're more expensive to produce, right? And they're still, even at those higher prices, it's hard to finance restoration purely with private sector climate finance, which is why blending is so important.
Reforestation has a double dividend because it protects biodiversity and it stores carbon. So I'm hoping that these things trade at very, very high premium because there's a double benefit to this, and hopefully developing countries get compensated for doing this, doing the world a double favor. Thank you.
It's not just reforestation, right?
Yeah. So both biodiversity and climate change mitigation.
So thank you everyone for joining us. I know you may have more questions, but we have a networking lunch waiting for us, and our panel will be there. So we'd be happy to have you over and continue networking and asking your questions. Thank you for joining us. That was really very good.